Okay, welcome to episode 141 of an Evolving Man podcast. Today I'm excited to be speaking to Anthony Abbagnano. Anthony is a renowned breathwork teacher, founder of Alchemy of Breath, and a passionate advocate for holistic healing and self-transformation. With decades of experience in personal development, trauma recovery, and spiritual growth, Anthony has become a leading voice in using conscious breath work as a tool for emotional and psychological and physical well-being. His work spans the topics of masculine psychology, peak performance, leadership, and healing from deep-rooted traumas. Anthony's teaching is deeply experiential, combining modern psychological insight with ancient practices to support clients and groups in accessing their innate wisdom, authenticity, and capacity for change. Welcome, Anthony.
Boom. Welcome. You nailed me. Thanks. Such a glorious introduction. Everything I hope will keep going uphill from here and not downhill.
Well, thank you. Thank you for agreeing to come and speak. And as I mentioned before we began, thank you so much for your work. I've spent the last few days listening to podcasts, reading through your book, and yeah, what a beautiful offering. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm really delighted. I love the idea of the evolving male, and I just want to kind of underscore that the sense of hope that brings for us all as men. It's a bit of an unsafe world right now for the masculine, and so anything that contributes to our evolution, any part I can play in that, I'm grateful for.
Thank you. Thank you. And we'll come on to that in a bit, but I found out yesterday listening to one of your podcasts that you'd been to boarding school. So it's like, oh, wow, how fascinating. And so we'll come on to that in a bit. Before we get on to that, I'd love for you to share a little bit of how you got into the work you now do. What's some of your journey?
Well, I had a very early experience with breath work. I was 8, and I was at boarding school, and I wasn't happy, and I was actually really, really unhappy. I used to cry myself to sleep every night, um, and and then one day this kid gave me a paper bag and told me to breathe into it, and so I did, and he got me to do 20 breaths, and then he squeezed me from behind and he let me down to the ground very gently, and it just felt like all the pain and all my perception of the suffering, the mire that I was in, just seemed so insignificant in comparison to that experience. It was like, okay, this is a new normal. And I suppose in a metaphysical way, it was like being connected to something I already knew. So it was a reminder rather than a new discovery. And it was a reminder not to give too much gravity to the day-to-day life that I was living. I was marginalized at school because I was still am half Italian, and so it was particularly difficult. Those years were particularly difficult in my memory. Not helped by people saying you'll be grateful when you grow up. You'll be grateful for all of that. And indeed, I am. They're right. I am grateful for it now. But yeah.
Thank you. And how did what happened? Did you immediately go into doing breath work from leaving boarding school?
No, well, first of all, I kept playing with the breath from that time onwards. But a lot of the games we'd play as kids are ones that kids play with now, like how long can you hold your breath in? How long can you hold it out? But these are all actually legitimate forms of breath practice. So we didn't know that at the time. We were just trying to do it for longer than others, than our friends. But I did actually stay close to the breath. I became a single parent. When I was 18. And in order for that to happen, I had to give coaching to my partner at the time and we had to do that every single day. So I was having to correct her breath practice and I'd breathe with her. And I didn't really know that's what I was doing. I was just really doing what I was told to do by the obstetrician that was helping us, and so I guess I was actually a breath worker since I was 18 years old, and then I kept revisiting it through my life. But actually, having become a young parent at 18, I became a single parent at 19. So I had to get on the bandwagon and make some money pretty quick. So that I spent the first 25 years of my adult life really perfecting the art of survival and thriving, and how could I prepare my son for a healthy and wonderful life. So I kind of, it's not that I sacrificed or severed connection with breath work or spirituality, because I think they're very closely connected. But I did, and I kept on experimenting. I was experimenting with plant medicines and different psychotropics and psychedelics since I was like 16 or so. So I was always looking for ways to understand the nature of consciousness and to reach the levels of consciousness that I didn't live within normally, the ones that were beyond what I knew. So, and breath always served as surprising. I mean, it's just so surprising when we consider something that we've taken for granted our entire lives, that when we give it our attention, everything changes. I mean, that is alchemy. And and it also borrows from quantum physics too, that when you give your awareness to something, it shifts. And indeed, it's true. I live that every day. So, but it took me until my early 50s to really tuck into breath work, as I'd say almost to wed it. I feel like I'm wedded to the breath now, um, and that it's changed everything always whenever I've used it. Never hasn't worked. So.
Fascinating. Wedded to the breath. And now you teach others and you run workshops and you kind of you teach facilitators.
Yeah, we do everything. I do workshops, I do retreats, a little less now because I'm writing more, thank goodness. And but I have many master trainers that I've trained, and I think we have facilitators in 70 different countries now. We've got 2,000 people that have been through our breathwork training. But it's not really just about breathwork. This is kind of the paradox, because for me it's a the breath is definitely the tool, and the breath is definitely of divine order. We know that, or we know that all Orthodox religions state it as so, something that's supernatural and beyond our ability to understand. But actually, I think what we've ended up doing in our academy is understanding that it's really teaching people how to facilitate life and flow, and the things that get interrupted when we don't have breath consciousness, all the things that go pear-shaped, things that go wrong in relationship, in relationship with everything from life itself to family to children to colleagues at work, whatever, the world, everything. I just have this dream of bringing prime ministers and presidents into the same room to have a breathwork session together and to see the magic that unfolds.
Thank you. I've had conversations with other people about, getting Boris Johnson to do some men's work and, to look at boarding school syndrome and,
Yeah.
things like that. So yes, I have the same vision. So beautiful vision.
Yeah.
Mm, mm. So I'd love for us to go back to your experiences at boarding school. A lot of people who listen to the podcast have been to boarding school, have had some form of childhood trauma. I'd love for you to share what that certainly the first years of boarding school were like for you.
Um, well, I had an elder brother, and he didn't really enjoy having a younger one. So, but he did go to school before me, and so that was meant to be of some comfort. Although he didn't really, he wasn't really there for me. He was sort of dealing with his own age group and enjoying being a senior and all those things. But I think it was and neither did I live in a particularly close family, even though my mother was Italian. I think at the time it was two things: being torn from the little sense of family that I had, and all the friendships that I developed as a young boy living in West London, and having to go into this prison. To me, it was a prison, and it was cruel. And so I just yearned. I yearned to be loved, and that's such a gosh. I can feel it in my upper belly as I speak. It's such a profound feeling of yearning and hopelessness mixed together, because nothing's going to change and you've got to toughen up. And so a very heavy load for a little 7-year-old to take. Um, and then I think I know my first discoveries of sexuality were at boarding school at the age of 7, and they were so confusing, still are even today, so confusing um, because I was getting love, and I didn't know what to do with that. It was illicit, it was illegal, it was secret, it was furtive, but it was meeting a part of me that was in a deep state of need. And I think that's probably been one of the biggest, most cumbersome issues for me throughout my childhood and into my adulthood, was this not understanding how it all worked, having a very distorted understanding of how it all worked. And then I think, as I said before I came on, I used to cry myself to sleep every night, and I really do remember those hours. It was like hours every night. You have to try cry as quietly as you could, because otherwise someone would in the dormitory would jab their elbow into you, kind of thing. So, and I remember having a handkerchief with my mum's eau de cologne on it. Actually, my brother gave to me. It was for 7-Eleven. I'm sure it's not very. It's some kind of cheap perfume, but that I used to keep that under my pillow, and I'm not quite sure whether it helped or made the yearning even stronger. But it was some kind of recognition, some kind of anchor for me. I remember that being significant. And then gradually, I guess we do get a slightly thicker skin, right? We begin to create new friendships under these very constrictive conditions, and then those conditions are what really then begin to carve the shape of our human possibility. And I think that's disastrous, because it's not about amplifying the experience of childhood. It's about containing it and compressing it into a form that is going to keep the status quo safe, and to perpetuate the unresolvedness that we inherited in those days. It wasn't that far from Tom Brown's school days. And I remember seeing that film, If. Did you ever? I think Malcolm McDowell was in it. Did you ever get a chance to see that? It was a
I
movie.
don't think I've seen it yet. I need to watch it, but yeah,
Oh God, it's a profound film, and touch many of the touch points that I think most of us would have felt at boarding school would be struck with it. Um, and it ends up in rebellion. And and of course we were banned from watching it. I think that was by the time I was at Harrow, so I must have been 13 or 14 by then. And and we were banned from watching it, which made everybody watch it. Of course, we we had this whole subculture grow as a result of that movie. Um, so it was grim. It was grim. There was no real island of sanity in the whole thing. It was like really losing your footing and understanding, being told that this is good for you, this is going to make a man out of you, and those kinds of things that were the way they used to think in those days. And of course, it's understandable because this was only a few years after the war ended. It was, you know, like 11 years after the war ended. Or no, sorry, I was born 9 years. So yeah, for 15 years after the war ended. So there was very much this muscle up to your trauma approach to life. Um, and the concept of manhood was very odd, very peculiar.
You. Thank you. As you're speaking, you mentioned a few things there, which I've obviously had many conversations over the years and read many biographies, and mentioned about your elder brother. It's very similar to Prince Harry and Prince William. When
Yeah,
Prince Harry got to Eton, William came up to him, and his mother's died a few months beforehand, and he's really looking forward to seeing his brother because he's been on his own at this boarding school. And his brother says to him, "You don't know me. I
yeah,
don't want any connection." It sounds like, and I've heard this quite a few times from other people, that the older brother is like, "I don't want anything." The parents say, "Well, it'd be really good for you to have your brother there." And
yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
not necessarily.
yeah. Yeah, my first beating was because my brother reported me,
Oh, wow.
and I was 7. That was in my first month, I think, of being at school, and I think that headmaster would probably be arrested today, where had this happened in today's world. But yeah, so there was definitely a love-hate thing with my brother.
How
Uh,
much older is he to you?
he for about 3 years and 9 months. So he really didn't want to have a little kid around him. He would.
Yeah. And you mentioned prison as well, and that's one of the themes from the biographies I've read. Nearly everyone uses the word either inmate, prisoners, incarceration. Bear
Yeah,
Grylls, he calls it prisoners. John Peel, inmates. Nearly everyone talks about the idea of prison because essentially we couldn't escape. We couldn't run away, flee. People would bring us back, or it was like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think. Well, if you've read my book, I think I tell the story in there about running away, um, which I did manage to do. I think I was 9 or something, 10, somewhere down there. But yeah, my dad and I sat on my dad's doorstep for a couple of hours at 5 in the morning, waiting for him to wake up, and that's the first thing he did was he drove me right back and got a beating and told to straighten out. That was the way it was dealt with. So yeah, not a lot of compassion in that space, huh? I mean, there were some friendships. I don't. There's some friendships there. I guess friendships born of suffering are sometimes interwoven in profound ways. Um, but I don't know any of my co-students today, any of them from the age of 7 till when I really did manage to escape. I think I took my A levels and I was out of there. I think it was 16 and never went back.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you. I wasn't in touch. I was in touch with two people since in the last 5 years, I've reconnected again with one of my best friends from school. And yeah, I went to see him about a month ago. And yeah, he's doing amazing work, a pediatrician, and really bringing in, realizing what safety didn't look like in our school.
Yeah.
and then bringing that in, safeguarding into his work.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anybody who's watching this podcast who I knew and is interested in this kind of healing, then I'd love to be in touch for sure. Because,
Amazing.
yeah, I did go back to my prep school, which was in Surrey. I went back uh, about 12 or 13 years ago. I went back. I took my wife there. We just got married, and she said, we were driving through Surrey, and I said, "Oh, this is where I went to school when I was 7." And she said, "Oh, show me." So I drove there, and it was during holidays, so it was closed. But we managed to find a hole around the side of the fence, and so I started walking across, really feeling like a successful rebel at this point, like who's going to hurt me now, kind of thing. Just you dare. There was something in there that was an anger that was there for me, and so as I was walking her around, the headmaster came out. He was a younger man than I. He was probably in late 30s or something, and he had this golden Labrador, and it all looked very proper. And he came up a bit sternly and saying, "This is private property, don't you?" And I said I went to school here, and I wanted to show my wife. And I'm actually trying to work on a trauma that I experienced at school, which was the first time that I was beaten. Because what happened when there were two other boys that were involved, and we were standing outside the headmaster's study. I can remember the wainscoting on the wall, the wood paneling, and I was leaning against it, and I was the second to go. So I heard the first young boy getting walloped and crying and screaming, and I was like in terror. And this elder boy, probably 10 or 11, came up and he said, "The way you're going to deal with this is by tightening your belly so much. You're going to clamp on it so much that you won't feel anything below." And so that's what I did. When I went in for my turn, I just clamped down on it as hard as I could, and got through the experience. And then ever since then, whenever I've felt a sense of threat, that's what I've done. I've clamped down on my gut so tight that I would stop feeling things below. And that has all kinds of ramifications throughout my life. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to go back there and breathe through the experience. So I my wife was so kind. She kind of kept the headmaster at bay and said, "Look, Anthony just needs to have a private moment or two here." And so I did. I sort of crouched down on the floor to be the height I would have been, and just breathed into what was about to happen and felt all of the tension and brought the breath back to that moment, and then walked into his study and saw that red wing-backed leather chair and that he had sat on, and made me pull my underpants and trousers down, and then put me over his lap, and then walloped me. And I went through that whole visualization with my breath in the hope that it would it would heal something. And it did a lot. Took a lot of courage, that's for sure. And it did do some good work. I think more than anything, it taught me how to help other people in that kind of a situation, that that can't get over it, that can't get over it. And so that's kind of why I like the breath so much, is because it is such pertinent medicine if it's taken to moments when we lost our breath. And when we consciously take it back, then there's a level of healing that can happen that's subconscious. It's not just in the conscious mind, but in the subconscious too.
Thank you for sharing. And I noticed that someone made a reflection when I was living as a novice monk in the Buddhist monastery. Was someone said, You don't breathe, Piers." I'm like, "What?" You just stop breathing. And I wonder as well, so I'd love you to talk a little bit about, with trauma, why is it that we stop breathing?
Um, Well, it's the shock. I mean, there are lots of things that are happening during the trauma, and losing the breath is a symptom of that. And it's also the cause of most of the problems that happen afterwards. But really, what's happening is all our processing power is going back from the prefrontal cortex back to the amygdala. And so we are then in the fight, flight, or freeze mode. And those are not conscious choices, those are survival choices. So we've lost our breath, we've lost our choice. And those are the two principal scars of trauma, if you will, that we lose our sense of choice when we greet that kind of situation, and we also lose our breath. So if we can choose to breathe, we're actually hitting two nails at once. And so that's why the use of conscious breath when we're in a traumatized state has such a powerful effect. But with the trauma work that I do now, we don't actually revisit the trauma. It's more about revisiting the child that got wounded by the trauma. And I guess an analogy for that would be that if you hit your thumb with a hammer, you don't need to visit the hammer or be angry with the hammer. That's not going to help. But you do need to work with the thumb. So the trauma work that I do is strongly related to inner child work, to retrieving that part of us that got stuck behind the trauma. And unfortunately, that's the part of us we want to forget, because we associate it with the trauma. And so in an effort to not remember the darkness or that shattering experience, we want to forget the whole thing and inadvertently throw out the baby as well with the bathwater. And so we live a life being partially who we are with so many fragments that have been shocked out of us, and that loss of breath then helps embody the trauma. So the trauma then learns to live in a certain place in our body. And then whenever we get reminded in any oblique way or direct way, that feeling in the body comes back, all the hormones start traveling again, the cortisol and the norepinephrine and the adrenaline, and the trauma gets even more embedded again. So the use of breath with trauma is so powerful, because if we can choose 10 breaths in a row, that's 10 choices we've made. And we need to know we're able to make choices in order to turn this around, right? Otherwise, we stay the victim of it, and our behaviors are tailored by it forever unless we take an active role in our own restoration.
And are moving from victim to creator, from
Yeah.
I'm powerless, which I would suggest is what a lot of these institutions or childhood trauma does. It makes us feel powerless.
Yeah.
And actually, what you're saying is by taking 10 breaths, you're going, actually, no, I'm doing something.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one thing they don't have the right to mess with, right? It's your sense of choice. They want you. I mean, I remember being told you have no power. You have to comply. If you don't comply, you will be beaten. And there's no, it's like the threat is too large a threat to avoid. I mean, I was a rebel and I found ways, and I started smoking cigarettes when I was 13 and smoking dope when I was 14, and all of those things. But I was always under threat. You can never do that without a sense of tension. Um, so that the consequences were more than disproportionate to the crime. I was like, my goodness.
It's like, prisoner crime. It's like, you couldn't make this up, really.
No, you couldn't.
It's interesting. I'm reading a autobiography at the moment by a lady called Karen Wilson, and her book's about her boarding school experiences. It's called Atrocious Behavior, and she went from age 7 through till 10, and she was expelled age 10. And the stories you mentioned about you have no power, matron she says, I'm going to break you.
Yeah.
That was what she actually said, and she tried everything from um, doing sending her to Coventry, uh, isolating her in a room underneath the stairs on her own, not allowing her to talk. All of these things punish, and it's like,
Yeah.
wow, there's so many stories like this, and when I read them, I get quite passionate. It's like, okay, it's time for these to close.
Yeah.
It's time. This doesn't work anymore. It's like I think in the past, these education systems they created, yeah, people for the empire, for but now it's like it's it's creating these emotionally cut off people. It's
Yeah.
time for us to bring in that emotional intelligence and
Yeah.
spiritual intelligence. So yeah, I can really resonate with that.
Well, I think also, I don't know if I've said this on podcasts before. A guy called Mo Gadat was
Mm.
one of the principals of Google, and he then left Google and wrote a book about happiness. And in one of his talks, he talks about an experiment he did with a survey of 12,000 people, where he arranged for them to be asked if they'd like to have their trauma cancelled. Would you like to have your trauma wiped clean? And he said over 1998 or 99% said no, because when they considered what that would mean, it would mean that they lost all the friendships that were made, the encounters, the healing, the self-development, the growth, the worldview, the spiritual connection, the understanding of a greater power. All of those things would have been sacrificed too. So, and I've certainly found in my own work when I'm training facilitators, either of breathwork or life, I'm always seeking what was their greatest wound that they can work with. Because if they're willing to work with their greatest wound, then that's how they're going to help other people. Here are you helping people by doing a podcast on a subject such as this. I didn't know that this existed. I didn't know there were groups of people who've been through this journey that were in contact with each other. That's already helped me, so it's when people, it's like in the cave you fear most lies the treasure you seek. And if if we can train people to be that robust and that resilient to go into that cave and find that treasure, that's really cutting the long grass for all the other people that are kind of in shock and not knowing how to deal with it. It gives us a candle on a dark night, in that dark night of the soul, that is gives us a destination to go to, a clearing in the woods, or whatever metaphor you want to use. And um, I think that's where the greatest teaching comes, because it's the most authentic. And even when I'm helping people in the depth of their suffering, just last week, I was with two people who are in suicide ideation, quite advanced ideation of suicide. The fact that they know that I've visited realms that deep and that dark means they can trust me, and that I can be alongside them as we go through inquiry and processes, um, and it makes all the difference. When that trust is there, it makes all the difference. Yeah. So
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I so agree. I find my work is as a coach working with ex-boarders, mainly people in positions of leadership who have been to boarding school and they've got to a point where it might be relationship, it might be addictions. And one of the things I've noticed over the years is that thing of trust. We really struggle to trust people because, you know, it was the ultimate betrayal. I mean, this idea that we were betrayed, we were told, as you mentioned, oh, it'll be good for you. And you're like, well, which part of this is good for me?
Yeah.
It's like, which world do you live in?
Yeah.
And I was speaking to Mark Sunderland a couple of weeks ago, who's an addiction specialist, and he says the most overrepresented people in his work are people who are adopted and people who've been to boarding school, early boarding. And he says the reason being is because both of them were told it would be good for you.
Mm.
So there's no real way of processing the trauma. And he gives out this equation. He says stress without attachment equals trauma.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that for me is like, of course, we didn't have the attachment.
Ain't that the truth? We didn't even have that question you mentioned earlier. You said something like, in what world is this okay? Or something. In what, that question didn't exist then. There wasn't the space for that question. There was no questioning. That was the whole point. If there was space for questioning, it would be crushed. So, more power to the people that are able to restore some breathing space in this whole enforced narrative that we learned was normal.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there's a huge community now, thousands, who are what's called the Boarding School Survivors Network. Nick Duffel, kind of has really been leading it. Simon Partridge. There's so many people out there now. There was just Nick Duffel 20 years ago, but now there's literally 30, 40 books on the subject. And I've done 140 episodes now. I've talked to Charles Spencer, the people like Bruce Parry, and psychiatrists, psychotherapists. It's like more people I speak to. It's like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
In which world is this okay to do this to children? And there's a definite growing movement, and yeah, so yeah, it's and I love what you said about the wound is where our gold is. It reminds me of Robert Bly in his book Iron John saying that, and I've really felt, oh yeah, this wound of boarding school, it is a gift now, and if we can see that.
Yeah, that's the irony of that. You'll appreciate it one day, the wagging finger. Got that right.
Yeah, we got a Bible which said in it, um, you will be expected to give back to this school that which you have been given. And it's like the school I went to was a lot of sexual abuse, and it was like, there's been a lot of it come out in the press, and a lot of my teachers spent time in prison, and it's like, it's like what? Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of segueing a little bit into, the mature masculinity. We mentioned at the beginning this idea of, the struggle. I mean, your book is called Outer Chaos, Inner Calm. There seems to be a lot of chaos. We're recording this September 2025. There's a lot of chaos just the last few weeks globally. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that chaos and also linking it into the masculine. Of
Mm.
what can we do?
Well, we have to bring AI into this, I'm afraid, for good or bad. But the the when I chose the title, I realized that it was a timeless title. It's always pertinent, and it I think perhaps is permanently going to be pertinent to the moment. Like, it can never be more pertinent than it is today, for example. I think now we've got, I understand, 60% more warfare than has ever existed in the world before. We've got proxy wars where powerful governments engage smaller countries to fight each other for them. Um, it is a shit show. We are in the middle of a shit show. And if we weren't human and we could zoom out and look at the planet through a microscope and watch its history, I think we would be noticing that there's a great preparation happening now, and it's never been as intense or as advanced or articulate as it is. So I think there's a call to manhood that is not far from the nature of call that people responded to with national conscription, with going into war, with our fight for my country, and all of those tragic reasons and acts that were committed. But there is something similar about the call. There is a call that's there right now, and I'm noticing not handfuls, but exponential response to this call from both masculine and feminine. What could happen after the divisiveness of and the polarization of these last 5 years, of divisiveness of sexuality, divisiveness of race, divisiveness of everything. Anything that we can cast an opinion on is what people are invested in, and we've all become unconsciously a part of the problem rather than a part of the solution. It's easy to get activated at the unfairness of what is going on. And if we get activated and contribute to any conversations about it, we're going to make it worse. We're not going to make it better. And you could take any, Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Palestine, you can pick any of these conflicts that are going on, Sudan, any of these conflicts that are going on. It's very easy to want to take a position for one or the other. And that could be even considered a manly thing to do. I have a friend who's a teacher who went to Ukraine and actually taught them trauma management work, but it was part of a whole movement of deliver things. Let's help the Ukrainians, and I think everybody needs help. First of all, I think if there's a perpetrator, they need just as much help as the victim, maybe even more, because they don't realize what they're doing. So their journey to wholeness is even more treacherous. But I think the nature of the call, when we undress it and we look at it in its nakedness, is that we need to show up for a different conversation. And AI comes into this because the acceleration with which it is advancing, which has already been, I think a year and a half ago, it was called exponential. I think 5 or 6 months ago, it was redefined as exponentially exponential. It's double, it's exponential to the power of 2. It wouldn't surprise me by now if it's exponential to much greater power. Where's this going? And what is the post? I don't want to call it apocalyptic, even though if you look up what the word means, it means cleansing. What is the world going to look like when this hoopla has reached its crescendo and it's had its orgasm and we're in the aftermath? What is that aftermath going to look like? And what is our role as humans, and specifically to this question as men, in leadership of a world that is more than slightly difficult to imagine? We're looking at 5 years, a minimum of 40% unemployment, perhaps 75% unemployment. What does that look like? What does all this free time look like? Is it going to be consumed with more and more argument, or is something different going to happen? We know that we're experiencing the great democratization I remember my father after the Second War, and as he would reflect on it, he stood alongside people of nobility and aristocracy and butcher's boys. And my dad was a butcher's boy before he joined the army, but he saved lives of people who were from a very different class structure than he was. But everything was leveled after the Second War. It was like first come, first served, cut and thrust, duck and dive. In order for me to have it, you've got to lose it. And that kind of mentality of paradigm that was not healthy for the male at all. It was built on the ego of prowess and survival, and having survived the war, and momentum was created that had very much contributed to the question that you asked earlier, like, in what world would this be normal that we can teach our kids this? That's exactly what it led to. And then we saw the hippie movement, which I was fortunate enough to catch, the not front edge of the wave, but the back edge of the wave, and understand this surge of free love and what that, the hope, the sense of hope that that brought, and was left unconcluded. It was just kind of like hovered there, and people found the treasure but didn't bring it back. It was like still see in Ibiza people smoking big fat joints on every Sunday morning at the San Juan market. They are still where they were in 1968 or 1970. But some people have moved on. And here we come to another great leveling moment of AI where knowledge has no value. Knowledge is 3 clicks away. Anything you want to know. It might be wrong, it might be a lie. We're even beginning to question what it is, because there's so much that's untrue that's being taken as true, and people manipulating that untruth and truth and so on. So with the democratization of knowledge, that we all have equal access to it, we can't lord it over each other anymore. And I'm also noticing that the value of the question is taking more significance than the value of the answer. So we're learning that with AI, we need to ask intelligent questions in order to get intelligent outcomes. And I think that's actually a very healthy thing. But it's also leading to a very different paradigm that we're not very ready for. So as a man, if you take a breath and you feel inside, if there is a call for you, what is that call to, and what shape are you going to take on this landscape post transformation when the world has changed? Because it's happening, right? And it's not just inevitable. It's so quick that it's a few blinks away. So take heed, I think, and take advantage of an opportunity like in my lifetime, and I'm 71, I've never seen before. This is the most exciting moment that humanity, I think, has been in a tremendous amount of time. So there is a lot of doom and gloom, but there always has been. 98% of the world is going to say that, but the 2% who are going to provide the leverage, to actually get the tip of the shovel under the rock and be able to shift things, are the people that are here right now in this moment thinking this way. So take your position and explore what that would be like, both as a human and as a man. And then, as far as us men, it's been rough being a man, right? We thought we were doing the right thing, and then we measured ourselves in the wrong ways, and we thought we were getting places and we were doing things, and all of a sudden we're getting cancelled for it. For example, I remember my brother said a very intelligent comment that stayed with me since, I don't know, 30 years, which is, why is it that the things that we boast about in the first half of our life are the things that we need to keep secret in the last half of our life? And so there's something lacking in that last half of life. Like, how do we navigate it? We don't really have elders that can help us. So if you're coming into your elderhood, get ready, because there are a lot of people that endow you with an authority that you may not know how to wield. A lot of people will look to you as a leader, even if you don't feel you're a leader at all. In fact, all of us are leading all the time. We're just not aware that that's what's going on. So, you know, thanks to those influencers with 60 jillion Instagram followers, we can understand that we're influencing too, just by who we are, not by what we say. So there's a real moment here of let's get the reckoning over already. Let's deal with it and show up for that as men are capable to do. Let's show up for our admission of the things that we're ashamed about. Let us voice them so they come to the air, so they have oxygen again, instead of being hidden in that dark crypt inside our hearts. And let us lead the way. And we're not even sure what that means yet, but let's just stay on the edge, stay on that front edge of not knowing, and understand that not becoming less uncomfortable with the not knowing is how we're going to know first, instead of staying within what's safe and what's comfortable now. And I think all the experience of my plant medicines and psychedelics has taught me that it's worth going one step beyond what we know. It really is a worthy. Now, I'm not saying take plant medicines. I'm not saying any of that at all. I actually use the breath to help people who've had problems with them. So I don't do them anymore. But I do see the power of the breath as providing the equivalent for us. So take a breath and examine what goes on in that breath. What is actually happening in that breath? If you've seen me in a podcast before, you've heard me say, I feel like I still haven't figured out what one breath means, and I'm 71 years old. One breath is so freaking massive that that wow, it awes me into silence when I consider it. And yet we're taking 25,000 of those every day and not using them in a way that can really help us. It's our biggest, most available tool that we have, and we keep ignoring it. So breath awareness is where it's at.
Thank you. Maybe we should take a breath now.
Yeah. Mm.
Thank you. Could talk about so many different things there. I mean, thank you for sharing about AI and yeah, how things are speeding up. And I see that, the changes. I've heard those figures as well, 40, 70% of, unemployment potentially. I mean, and also that sense of that vision I see, whether that's as elders, and I talk about this a lot. I've interviewed on the podcast Rob Boothroyd, who's written around the archetypes, and I'm part of the Mankind Project, which again does a lot of men's work across the world. And part of the sovereign archetype is this idea of vision. What do we want to see? And for me, sometimes when I've gone into chaos or when I'm with clients, it's like just asking, what is it that you want? What is the vision here? And I found that useful when it does seem very chaotic. Just go, actually, and my wife, before she passed away, was really great for just saying, it's all going to be fine, Piers. And she was really good at seeing that bigger picture and seeing that it's going to be quite unsettled for the next couple of years. It's going to be quite a lot of chaos. But, like you've said, that 2% of people waking up and then going, right, yes, yes, change is happening. And that was really her sense that change is coming and in a very positive way. And that's my sense as well. And it's almost like to us as elders to keep holding that faith of, yeah, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And uh, yeah, so, I mean, one of the things I'd love to kind of, I guess, maybe as we're moving towards the end of the podcast, is just around daily practice. It's like if somebody is going, yes, this really resonates with me, what are the things you would suggest? So in your book, you talk about, just taking a breath, about just, being in the moment. Are there any other practices that we can introduce into our lives to help us navigate this next period of time?
Yeah, of course there are. There are as many as we can invent, and I think there and each of us has the ability to invent breath patterns and breath expirations that suit our particular condition. But there are some standard ones that are recognized as ways of um, regaining equilibrium and of bringing the nervous system back to being less nervous. And there are things like the coherence breath, the box breath. There are many names. I'll give you an example, which is the coherence breath, which is one of my favorites, which is a very simple breath. It's 5 seconds inhale, 5 seconds exhale through the nose. Doesn't have to be a conscious connected breath. It just needs to be a conscious breath. And if you count 5 seconds into your voice recorder on your phone and just do it for 10 seconds and make a sound every 5 seconds and then listen to it and breathe with it, that's going to be one of your greatest tools ever. So it's 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, and do it 3 times a day when you first wake up, before you go to sleep, and in the middle of the day on an empty stomach. And what you'll find is that within just a few days, every time you get upended or unnerved a bit, you'll go to that breath pattern. And then if you keep it up for 3 weeks, even 2 weeks, you'll start to breathe like that naturally. And what's actually happening physiologically is that you are increasing your heart rate variability, which means the heart rate variability is the measure between the increments that your heartbeat changes in response to any stimuli, physical, emotional, external, internal, whatever. And so it's basically your responsiveness increases. That makes you more agile, makes you healthier. It also, you'll find that you resonate more with the world around you. You feel more calm, you feel more at peace, you feel more causative. And I want to do that instead of giving, because there are things like the Wim Hof breath. There are people that have given their own name. I haven't created an Abbagnano breath because I don't believe the breath belongs to me. I believe the breath is lent to us, not given to us. And I think that's proven by the fact that our last breath is going to be repaying the debt. So, I don't want to distract from even with the coherence breath, that, oh yeah, I've got this technique for that situation. It's not really what it's about. It's about the awareness that your breath is the best friend you ever had. It's more important than your parents, your children, your lover, your any outside relationship. Your breath is the most important relationship you can have, because it will stand by you in every circumstance you experience until you're ready to leave, until you're ready to pay back the debt and to to leave this human experience. So if you're prepared, that's why I said I'm wedded to the breath, because if you're prepared to accept that, then you can lean into it and you can count on it. And from that point on, really all you need to do is to notice how you're breathing in any given state. If you find that you're breathing quickly, what is your emotional state? Or if you're feeling panicky, how are you breathing? Or when you're meditating and you're in like a still space, what's your breath like? And everywhere in between, what are you breathing like when you're climbing 10 flights of stairs? Are you breathing through your mouth or your nose? What are you breathing like when you're making love? What are you breathing like when you feel your orgasm is coming? Is your breath getting shorter or are you keeping it longer? And if you catalog all of these different breath styles, you can reutilize them. You can open your little mental catalog and go, okay, um, I can actually delay my orgasm by using a breath pattern. I can actually have a whole body orgasm if I manage my breath properly. And these are all things that you can be told. I'm happy to share them, but also they're things that we discover in our own relationship with the breath. So breath intimacy is really number one. Number two is contemplate your first breath and your last breath of life and what happened. You can chat GPT it, ask chat GPT what happens. You'll be surprised some of the answers you'll get about the openings and the lungs full of liquid and the shutdowns and begin to develop your own relationship. Empower yourself with your own relationship, not just with what I suggest. And enjoy the ride. And then the big kahuna is the conscious connected breath. So there's breathing and not being conscious of it, which is what we do 25,000 times a day. Then there's breathing and being conscious of it, and everything changes. You can't you can't pay attention to your breath without it changing, which is that's a copy paste of what they say in the quantum world, is that if you give something your attention, it changes. The flow of electrons change when someone is paying attention to their flow. So take that and consider that just of one conscious breath. And then the conscious connected breath, which is what we do we've been doing it for 10 years now, twice on Sundays for free, is about connecting those conscious breaths. And then what happens is we really begin to leave the logical sequential world behind and we enter into a whole different realm of conception and awareness. Indeed, when I say conception, that's in the Quran, was the breath upon his mother's chest that conceived Jesus. So in the Catholic tradition, the Immaculate Conception was understood in the Quran to be the breath upon Mother Mary's breast that conceived Jesus. So if you're willing to go that far, I don't believe there's anything more subtle than the breath. It's the highest form of awareness. And when we restore it into our physiology, we are reconnecting a circuitry that was meant to be there. And we suddenly understand things that we couldn't understand. So things like addiction, things like suffering, things like victimhood, things like relationship quagmires and minefields, all of those things all of a sudden get a very, very different value. And let me just say this, people that breathe together stay together. So uh, that's just a little hint of what you can expect.
Thank you. That's really powerful. Thank you. So what I'm hearing is breath contemplation, and you mentioned the coherence breath, 5 in, 5 out. You mentioned 3 times a day. How long
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
And then you mentioned contemplating the first breath, the last breath, and then conscious connected breath. So
yeah.
And for people who are interested in doing the Sunday free workshops, how do they find out more about those? How do they?
Yeah, come to alchemyofbreath.com, alchemyofbreaths.com, and there should be a pop-up or half a scroll and you'll find it Sunday. It's called Breathe the World. We do it at 9:30 UK time in the morning and 5 p.m. UK time. And the idea is that in the morning we breathe from sort of London to Sydney, and then in the evening we breathe from Hawaii to back to London again. So we are breathing the world, this in and out breath, if you will, every Sunday. So what's great about it is that we do it in community. You'll meet people that'll become lifelong friends. So several hundred people that come and do it. We want you to contribute. We want you to use the chat box and put in, we create a pool of meaning with the chat box every time. So, and there are themes for each Sunday Breathe that are all about the human condition. So it's a fascinating thing to do. It's a great way to spend a Sunday morning or Sunday. It lasts, the whole transmission lasts 1 hour, and half an hour of that is that conscious connected breath. And there's a little intro and an outro, and that's it. So,
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. And like I said at the beginning, thank you so much for your work. Is there any last thing you'd love to say? Any last piece that maybe you've not shared?
but, well, I do have this fantasy, because I've been doing a lot of podcasts recently, and I do want to ask the same. I want to make the same request, which is that if you're willing, would you consider what a random act of kindness might be as soon as you've pressed the stop button on this podcast, and then go do that for somebody? And my hope is we'll get enough of us doing it that we'll change the world that way. And then one last little message from really from my heart to yours, because those of us who've been to boarding school have been damaged. And if if no, if anyone can understand what I'm going to say, it's us. I believe that when we see cruel behavior in the world, that we recognize that the cruelty is born from a very distressed childhood and a very wounded child that has not been recovered. So, if it's an act of violence, or if it's in an argument you're having or a conversation you're having, just to take a breath and be aware that the inner child of that person you're talking to or receiving from is probably in a pretty sad state in that moment. So see if you can be the hero of any moment and invite the people you're with to take 3 or 4 breaths, just to pause and to let the adrenaline stop rising, let it settle just a little bit.
Thank you. Great, great advice. Great words to end. So yeah, thank you, and I do invite everyone who's listening, one, to do a random act of kindness, and then secondly, please go and visit Anthony's website, Alchemy of Breath. I'll put it into the description.
Great.
So please click on that. But yeah, thank you. And if I can support your work in any way, please do let me know.
Thank you, Piers. You already have.
Okay, bye bye.